Hello, everybody. We're excited to have you. We're going to be kicking off this whole series with this video. And in this series, we're going to be talking about multi-domain architectures and how it enables IT operations and cyber operations across the board. There's a lot of detail, but we're going to try to break it down into manageable chunks and chunks that are beneficial to the business and agencies as a whole. So before I get started, introduce Jamie. Jamie, yeah.
Thanks for having me. I'm Jamie Sambauer. I'm a managing principal architect for Modern Cyber.
Awesome, awesome. And you've written books and a lot of stuff.
A little bit of everything. Yeah, I've written a couple security books on integrated security architectures, so probably very relevant to a multi-domain conversation. Also like to do a lot on LinkedIn, was just telling you.
Yeah. Well, so overall, we want to kind of start by defining the problem and the reason for multi-domain architectures, why they're so effective. So, Jamie, what are some of the problems that we're trying to fix here?
So it really comes down to a lot of the fiefdoms, whether it's in engineering or operations. But where we see a lot of the bigger challenges, those fiefdoms create challenges actually delivering services, whether it be reliably or just doing it securely.
So service delivery, yeah. So some things I've seen in agencies are mainly surrounding lack of visibility. We don't know what we have. We don't know things like what infrastructure we have, how it's connected, how they're all interconnected together, and then really the flows that traverse it. Have you seen things that are similar?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with just having a basic inventory, like what is out there, what are the users that I'm actually supporting, what is the devices, whether it's a workstation or IoT device, and then my infrastructure itself might be on-premise, might be multiple sites, might be cloud, and then you have the applications. Applications could be delivered via software as a service or could be traditional on-premise data center applications. All of these things actually create the bigger picture of IT. And most organizations can't actually figure out, well, what's on the network, what are my users doing, and how do I apply policy, security, and good service delivery behind it.
And that's going to be one of the big things that we're going to be hitting on, right, between us and Steve and Mosa, is really how we can use what you have in place initially to establish a lot of these things just with the investments you've already made. So that's going to be exciting. A lot of options that we're going to give you to really just flip a switch, turn the key, and make things happen, and then really provide that pathway into a zero trust architecture. So that'll be exciting. Jamie, when you're talking about establishing visibility specifically to applications, et cetera, what type of things do you want to see about flows, and how does that kind of provide us a pathway into zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of key things is if you have your users that are out there, how do I understand based on some form of app? You've got devices and told you I'm an awful drawer. Devices actually accessing those apps. So from a visibility standpoint, how do I make sure I understand who this person is, what the device is, all of the communication patterns. So this is kind of the key in the center. Sure. And then on the flip side, what is that application? What kind of data is associated with it?
Sure.
And then how does it support my mission or business?
Absolutely. And I think that's an exciting feature, right? You've heard of north-south versus east-west traffic. Well, when we're talking about segmentation, et cetera, how we used to police traffic was we'd put these big, castle moats, big walls in front of our environment, and then pretty much everything behind the scenes got to play with each other without really any visibility at all. So kind of what would you call that transition, and what kind of drove the need for that?
Well, I think it kind of started with the explosion of devices, right? We went from an individual user having a managed desk where they had their computer, they went to work from 8 to 5, and then magically smartphones started happening. And then after that, we saw more and more IoT devices, whether it be building management devices, could be sensors that are within the organization, could be cameras or IP phones or anything and everything that actually exists out there. And the lack, most organizations just couldn't keep up with it.
Sure.
Like a lot of times those devices aren't bought by or sourced by IT. It's a part of the business that's actually using that to achieve what they need to do.
Yep.
So IT had to be able to deal with all of the different device types and then be able to get visibility into, what's the device and then how does it communicate?
Sure. Yeah, and when we've historically talked about shadow IT and things that we don't know about there, non-standard protocols that might traverse our networks. I've called it historically set and forget networks, right? Oftentimes a program comes in, they have a specific mission that, maybe they finish in 12 to 18 months, and then, the infrastructure kind of gets like stranded out there for ongoing support, et cetera. So yeah, that's a big thing. Well, I guess as we get started, let's define some basic terminology, right? So Jamie, how would you define multi-domain?
So for me, it's when we define domain by itself, it's any point within an organization compute, everything from the network itself to data center networks, to cloud networks, to campus and branch networks. So you have these different places in the networks that actually hit multi-domain, but you also have different fiefdoms within the organization itself. That structure is multiple domains as well. Sure. It's the way we operationalize these technologies. So when I say that, it's security teams, it's the network team, it's the application and development teams. All of these different teams actually sit and organize around a specific technology or capability that's offered. And they're all siloed and fiefdomed off.
Yep. And that creates a problem, right? Because oftentimes, especially programmatically or from the mission perspective, as you said earlier, oftentimes they're not even under the CIO program. And the CIO program kind of figures it out the hard way, after the fact. So controllers, we're going to be talking a lot about controllers and how they're kind of the pinnacle piece for each domain. So how would you define those controllers?
So controllers provide a level of orchestration on top of multi-domain. So when we're thinking about controllers, you want to think about all of the tasks that would normally happen in those individual silos. Sure. And think about orchestrating the steps that would normally be done by hand or by an individual in an automated fashion. This is what allows an organization to become more agile in how they deliver some of these services.
Yeah. So when you have multiple controllers, perhaps a controller that controls your data center infrastructure versus controller that, for your enterprise or extended enterprise, and even controllers for the cloud, how does it look to orchestrate all those together? How do you kind of bring those together? And we will be talking about that in more detail, but kind of at a high level.
So at a high level, it's more about being able to take and perform integrations or some level of shared integration or context. And that can happen in multiple ways. Sometimes it's as simple as being able to integrate within the data plane, and sometimes it's integrating in other areas like the management plane or control plane. And so being able to exchange some level of information to achieve end-to-end outcomes, as I like to call it, is really where where a lot of that integration from a multi-domain standpoint comes from.
No, that's excellent. And I think one thing that you're going to notice throughout the series that we're going to be talking about are things that take our visibility and our ability to manage, things like configurations, compliance, and what flows we have in a more efficient fashion via things like streaming telemetry. So we'll be talking about that. We're also going to talk about, once you've collected all of this metadata, what do you do with it? How do you make it actionable as quick as possible? And I think you're going to be talking a little bit about AI/ML, right, from a policy perspective.
Absolutely. Some of these, back to the kind of some of the problems, these things can't be solved by humans responding to threats or responding to new lines of business. Like ransomware is my favorite example because most of the examples that are out there, you'll see the lateral movement, the actual propagation of ransomware happens so quickly, no one can physically respond to that type of threat and shut it down in a normal, task by task outcome.
Sure. And that actually transitions us kind of into the last part of this Lightboard, and it's around, defining zero trust and then kind of defining the basic, kind of draw for us the basic, how policy decisions are made and then how we enforce them. Because as you'll hear from Mr. Vetter, for instance, now we can have a switch as a policy enforcement point. And that's a big paradigm shift in our minds, right? Historically, we've had these firewalls and, north, south, east, west, right? We've got these firewalls that sit, grab north-south traffic. But in terms of segmenting that, let's just say between multiple VLANs in a building, that's almost impossible. It's definitely not efficient. So yeah, do you want to just take us through the general tenets there of?
Yeah, so I want to start with the basic, which is, zero trust is very misconstrued by many in industry. So depending on which person you talk to, inside your organization, outside your organization, you probably get a different definition or answer. NIST actually did great by releasing 800-207 and giving organizations kind of the blueprint of a common definition. And it really starts with being able to build a policy model with zero trust architecture. And there's kind of a couple key pieces. One is the policy information point, or PIP as we like to say for short. Policy information point can be as simple as your patch management system or your vulnerability management system. But it also incorporates any and all context sharing. So being able to take and bring in information into the policy engine. Below that, you actually have a policy decision point. And the policy decision point could be as simple as a firewall management tool, an orchestration tool. And really, its role is to define policy. So the policy administrator goes in, defines some level of policy, and then essentially expects that to be enforced. Okay. Which brings us to the last point, which is PEP, or policy enforcement point. And its role in life is to take the information from that PDP and be able to enforce it. And this could be as a part of a network, it could be a switch or a router, it could be a firewall, it could even be policy within your application. So that's the fun part about zero trust, is that architecturally we want to be able to define policy that's going to scale. Now, the last thing I want to say, and it's a passion area of mine, when we're talking about zero trust, it's more about being able to remove some of the implicit trust that's been generated for years and years. We spent 30 years building things so they can communicate with one another. Zero trust wants to remove that implicit trust and be able to enforce end-to-end policy in a least privilege and risk-based mode.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we're excited to walk through all these topics with you. It seems complicated, but we hope to simplify it and really show how it can bring massive impact, immediate impact to your modernization efforts, to your security efforts, and overall transformation strategy as a whole. So thank you.